Gratitude is a little thing that makes a big difference. Winston Churchill. Welcome to the Guyana Dialogue. I'm your hostess, Shamiza Ali, and it is truly a pleasure being here with you this evening. Tonight's topic will be constitutional reform help to improve the quality of governance, including accountability and transparency. The Guyana Dialogue is being sponsored by a coordinating council of Guyanese based in the US, UK, Canada, Guyana, and the Caribbean. Funding support is by well known philanthropist Dave Narayan from Dave West Indian Imports. Please welcome my moderator for tonight, Dr. Tara Singh.
Thank you very much, Shamiza, and welcome to our
Welcome, Dr.
viewers.
Tara. Our panelist is Dr. Ganga Ramdas and Professor Narayan Prasad.
Hey,
Hello, everyone.
Welcome. Our guest tonight is the Minister of Parliamentary Affairs and Governance, the Honorable Gail Teixeira.
Hello, good night,
Welcome,
everyone.
everyone. Dr. Tara,
good
please
night.
go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Shamiza, and we are very happy to have the Honorable Minister of Governance and Parliamentary Affairs with us. I know she's very busy. She's the leader of government business in Parliament, and apart from that, she's very active at a leadership role within the government and the party as well. So we thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Well, before we get into the topic per se on some aspects of constitutional reform, would you like to make a general comment on the situation with the teacher strike? Or
Well, I
the
think
go ahead.
I think it's known already at this point. What you know and what I know are the same thing, and that is that the talks collapsed, and the union wants us to pay for 2019 to 2024, and we have said that we are paying from 2024. That's where we'll start. As you know, there was COVID, and people received their salaries but weren't working, and schools were closed. So what we know is the union said they're going back to the court. So we'll see what happens there.
Okay, thank you. I saw a release from the Minister of Education saying that their demand is really unreasonable. But okay, we leave it
Well,
there.
we don't have the fiscal space.
Yeah.
We don't have the fiscal space in 2024 to pay for 2019, 2020, 21, 22, and 23, 5 years increases. And what they're asking for is 20% increase for each year. There's no fiscal space in our budget for that. And therefore, it's not a fair or reasonable request.
And for the past 3 years, I have read that they were given at least 30% salary
they were
increase
given
apart from
increases.
other benefits.
Yeah. So it's unfortunate that the union is being blind to what is a reasonable arrangement in negotiation. But I believe there are other issues, and I believe that it may have a political agenda behind it. So it's unfortunate.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Minister. Now, I recall in a previous discussion we had with the Attorney General, he made the point that Guyana has one of the best constitutions in the Caribbean. He's talking about with the 1980 constitution that was amended in the 2000 with over 200 different amendments. That being the case, why is this rush for constitutional reform? I know the PP has it in the agenda, but is that really a national priority? If you care to comment on that.
I think that look, we had constitutional reform between 1980. There was no constitutional reform until 1999, 2001, with the presidential appointed Parliamentary Constitutional Reform Commission. It went for 2 years, and it went across the country. And it was an interesting exercise in the sense that many people didn't even know what the 1980 Constitution included, because brought in with a referendum, caught it, and which the public had no idea what it was about. So, in fact, that process was a learning process for many Guyanese. And what came out of it, I think, was there were very many progressive amendments. In fact, I agree with my colleague that the Guyana Constitution is the most progressive in the English-speaking Caribbean. Why go again? Well, there's always a view that it's now 22 years since the last review. Doesn't hurt to go again and see what doesn't work and what has been problematic and what's new. There are some areas that we as government may want to amend, but also I'm sure that there are others that have their own views. But it has to be subjected to a consultative process across all of Guyana, as it was done in 1999-2001, especially including hearings that were held in the Parliament buildings by different organizations coming forward, and a variety of committees that looked at human rights, local government, etc. So it's not an unhealthy process, but it is not a rapid process. We're starting in 2024. I don't think that we'll finish it 2026. I don't think it'll be finished in time for 2025, because we have to go across the country. We cannot bring a constitution that doesn't involve the people and what they are suggesting. And of course, there are changes in the Constitution that require a referendum. Some changes require a 2/3 majority, and some require a simple majority. And therefore, there's some aspects that are kind of locked in. For example, the areas of human rights. If you want to take away a human right, you have to have a 2/3 majority in Parliament, and you have to wait 6 months before it is enacted by the president. If you want to add a human right, it's a simple majority. So there are areas like that. Plus, there are other sections of the Constitution that require a referendum. So even if the process goes through and there are more amendments, and if there are particular sections, articles of the Constitution would require a 2/3 majority and a referendum. So it's not it's a process that takes time, and it should take time. Starting it isn't in haste. We have been in government now on 3 years, but that was a promise we made, and we are executing the promise. But we're not going to rush the process. It took a while for the nominees to be made by the different political parties, and it's the same formula as 1999-2001, equal numbers of politicians and civil society representatives. So you have 10 members from the political parties and 10 from civil society. So I think it was a healthy process that started the last time, a model that worked, and this one will too. There were two important amendments that were made since the 1999-2001 period. One was to do with the recall legislation, which we had as a government and as a party in opposition had proposed for decades. And only when the People's National Congress and opposition started to lose representatives, not crossing the floor, but leaving them, that they became interested, and we were able to get consensus on the recall legislation. And the other one was to include a new parliamentary committee on oversight of the security, which came out of the 2002-2008 crime wave. So those are two major amendments that have been made since 2001 constitutional reform period.
I guess that these were not part of the entrenched provisions, the two amendments that were made.
No, they were not. They were not.
Okay.
They were not.
All right. Just quickly before I pass you on to Professor Narayan, I know the PNC in the manifesto in 2015 had indicated that their foremost priority is constitutional reform, and that within 100 days they will table a bill to that effect in Parliament. That never happened. You have any idea why they didn't push forward that, since they are pushing it so aggressively now?
Actually, they did bring a bill. Mr. Nagamutu, as Prime Minister, brought a bill. It was called the Constitutional Reform Consultative Bill. but it was never passed in Parliament. It was brought to Parliament, laid in the House, but never debated. So it just lay there. And so it came around 2018. And so, and it was never passed. So what we did is, when we got into government, is bring the new bill, which we had the same model as the 99-2001, brought that and passed it. So that why they didn't do it, who knows? There are many things they didn't do, many promises they made in the 100 days, which showed they were quite unorganized and disinterested in in keeping the promises they made. They made many, many promises that were to be executed in the first 100 days that were never implemented, including salary increases for the public servants and the teachers, for example. None of that was done.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Professor Narayan, your question to the Minister. Professor Narayan. Dr. Ganga, are you hearing me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead and ask the Minister.
Well,
Yeah.
okay. Thank you, Dr. Tar, for this
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead, Professor Narayan. Sorry, Dr. Ganga.
Okay.
Go ahead. You have your thing
Yeah.
on mute.
Given Guyana's, okay. I'm sorry.
Go ahead with it. You're having problems with the system, Professor.
Yeah.
Let's go
You can
back
hear me
to
now?
Dr. Ganga.
Okay. Okay. So thank you, Dr. Tar. Thank you, Honorable Minister. It's nice to see you here. This is an honor and an opportunity to get into the deeper recesses of all your experiences. I tend to be more on the operational side and practical side because of my limited range of experiences. However, as a citizen, there are a number of things that came up in the public media. One is about consultation, and I would ask how it's implemented and how it's assessed. That's one. And then the other one that came up was the Constitution versus business rights or business contracts. I think this was in the media that the Constitution is above business contracts.
Well, let me answer the last one first, if you don't mind, and that is the supreme law of Guyana is the Constitution. Just like in the United States, the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the United States. You may have many laws made, statutes made by individual states or federally, but the overarching supreme law of the country is the Constitution. And so Guyana, as a hybrid Republican Westminster system, follows a similar pattern as other countries that have constitutions. So we have a written constitution, and it's the supreme law that no other law should contradict it. And if it does, then it is unconstitutional, unlawful. And so the issue of contracts and business rights all fall within and under the Constitution and the other laws of Guyana, so that your right to property, for example, is the right of every citizen, and how that is protected by the Constitution. So that you may remember that long years ago, when the Constitution provided for the government to take away land, expropriate people's property, and that was done under the 1980 Constitution. What was added in the 2001 amendments was that it had to be done with compensation and adequate compensation, so that the state could not arbitrarily take people's property, as was done by the Burnham regime, for those of us who are old enough to remember. including private schools, were taken over. In fact, many of those were compensated after we got into government post 92, where a number of private schools had been taken over, become public schools, never compensated. And we paid them for their property. And this was decades after that had happened. So that's one issue, that people's rights of property, including businesses, are within that. And contracts obviously fall under what is the laws of Guyana. The issue of consultations and how one assesses them. The argument by some people, and I think it's a delicate issue. For so long, many people have been left out pre-92 from any consultation process. And regrettably, it was based on the fact that some people didn't support the then government, and they happened to look different from the then government. And so, from the 19s after independence to 92, some people and groups of people were never consulted. The majority Indo-Guyanese and Amerindians, for example, as two big blocks. However, post-92, and what we've tried in developing in a democratic state, and we are a democratic state, but it has taken us a while with many changes and many trauma to get to where we are now. But we're still an emerging democratic nation. And so the consultative process now is one that wants to include everybody, that no one is excluded. And so for some people, they feel uncomfortable with this. They don't like the fact that we're going to every single village or every community, regardless of whether they voted for us or not, that we are present and that we're representing. And so the argument on consultation many times is nuanced in that if we go to a village like Ithaca, then we're told, well, why are you there? You're not supposed to be there. But if we go to Quarantine and we go to a village 63 or Port Morant, we'll be told, you see, you're leaving out people. And so consultation must be recognized as an effort, and a good faith effort by the government and this government to reach everybody, regardless of their political affiliation, their racial, how they define themselves ethnically, religiously, gender-wise, etc. And so for us, consultation is a fundamental platform of our government. It doesn't mean that we're able to reach every single person, but we are reaching large amounts of people who and especially during the 5 years of the Granger government, were totally isolated. And so, and how do you assess that? You assess that by the data. And what is the data? The number of photographs of community meetings with hundreds of people, 100 people, 50 people, the number of meetings that I held, the number of representational issues that have been taken up. There's evidence to show that. It may not be put into data and statistics, but there's graphic evidence to show that there is consultation right across this country. And so when the president goes into South Georgetown and makes commitments, within a matter of days, people see them being implemented. An area like Kitty, which is a very mixed community, and says, we're going to do your roads, and you go through Kitty today, and you'll see that the roads have been done. That is what our people want. They want to see action, and the promises are kept, and they will make choices when it comes to elections of who they will support. But our people, like people all across the world, they want to see improvements. They want to see betterment. And out of consultation comes action, and action leads to improvements. May not in everything that everybody wants, but no community in Guyana right now can say that they've been left out of the goods and services that the government is developing, sharing, giving out, working with people on. And so I think that, if someone wants to do research, it's not difficult to do research on the level of consultations going on. It's not difficult at all. It just means work and serious research. But I think some people don't want to do that. They just want to throw things around. in the constitutional reform process. The Constitutional Reform Commission, once it's set up, it'll have a secretariat, and that it will plan its work program. And so that will include going to the 10 regions of Guyana, and who knows, it may even include coming to North America to do consultations there with the Guyanese in diaspora. Who knows? Anything's possible, because the diaspora has an interest in what happens in their country of origin, and they still have ties, and they still want to see Guyana move forward. And so the Constitutional Reform Commission will also, once it gets set up, it'll, as I said, do its work program and start looking at holding hearings, inviting any organizations by public advertisement to come and make presentations, formal presentations to the commission. This is how we did the last time. I was the chairperson of the Human Rights Task Force of the Constitutional Reform Commission in that period. And my committee was very interesting. I was the chair, that's PPP. Mansour Nadir was representing the United Force, he was an MP then. Deborah Barker represented the PNCR at that time, and Gina Rose, who represented APA, Amerindian People's Association, was the representative of civil society. And we drafted and made the recommendations to do with the human rights section of the Constitution. And we were able to do it in a non-confrontational, non-partisan way, to bring in some very important clauses into our human rights, including the anti-discrimination clause, which is in our Constitution, as well as areas of requiring that the police must charge someone within 72 hours of holding them, and if not, they have to release them, or they have to go to a court of law to get an extension based on justification. So a number of areas, but the other parts of the Constitution, which I think, on the governance side, why this is so special and why this Constitution is so special is that because the period when we brought it in was very fraught with violence, with, at that time, the PPC government, although an international observer team had said the elections of 97 were free and fair, nevertheless, the CARICOM said we had to give up half of our term of office. We had to agree to a number of things in order to return to normalcy and to get the opposition to return to Parliament. And so we did, for normalcy and for peace, and to move our country forward. That led to some very interesting amendments in the Constitution. Some have worked, some have not worked, and they may come under the review, come under the microscope during the constitutional reform period. The opposition leader, for example, has a veto on the president in terms of appointments to constitutional bodies, as we saw with the judicial service, the police service, and the public service, for example, appointees. And there are a number of others where the opposition leader has a key role to play. This was all an attempt to build a normal, rational relationship between government and opposition. Even the appointment of GCOM and the commissioners was based on that belief that in order to reduce a very fractured society, that a normalcy we needed as a government. Guyana needs normalcy in order to have stability, and democracy needs stability. It cannot grow in a violent situation, or one where your two blocks that won't work with each other. And so there were many things that were built into that Constitution that tried to carve out a role for the leading opposition, and the belief that was based on a belief of that the leading opposition and the president were honorable men. They're honorable gentlemen who would understand the context of the Constitution. Some of these have worked, some of these have not worked over the years based on leading opposition. We've had several since the amendments in 2001. we had Corbyn, we had Hoyt, then Corbyn, then Granger, then Barrett Jagdeo, and now Mr. Norton. And so as you remember, in the 2018-19 period of appointing the chairperson of the GCOM, and that whole episode that happened, that delayed the elections as required by the Constitution after a vote of no confidence. So the Constitution hasn't failed us. What has failed us is the human element in implementation of the Constitution, as, for example, with the appointment of the chairman under Mr. Granger as president, when he put the gentleman, Mr. Patterson, and then subsequently, a year and a half later, had to put Justice Claudette Singh after a number of meetings, negotiations, walkouts, whatever else happened, where we finally got a chairperson that both sides could live with. And Claudette Singh, as a former retired justice, did not do harm to Guyana. She had us biting our nails many times, and many times we felt like a yo-yo going up and down. But she did not fail Guyana, and she did not fail the Constitution. She upheld the Constitution. And so I think that when our Constitution has been under duress, it has been able to withstand. And in a number of cases with the Chief Justice during the 2020 period, it showed that at least the Chief Justice was willing to uphold the Constitution. And the Caribbean Court of Justice did the same. And so the Constitution is there to be protected, to be guarded, and to be insulated so that, you're not, constitutions are not fickle. They're not supposed to be fickle, to be exploited or used by the state to the detriment of the people. That's the concept of it.
Dr. Gang, I have a quick follow-up question.
How would you say the disadvantaged poor and women as a minority, how are these groups defined? How do we go about doing that?
Well, the Constitution, you're talking about Constitution because the Constitution has an anti-discrimination clause. Secondly, the Constitution protects women's rights in terms of equal pay, in terms of we're equal with men in every respect. We're equal to inherit, we're equal to choose. And so the issues of our rights as women, we have a clause in the Constitution which was very important and pushed by women's groups across Guyana, even those that didn't agree with each other, to have what was called an eligibility clause. And so some people call it quota. It's not a quota. We do not have a quota in Guyana. We have what's called an eligibility clause for parties wishing to contest. If they don't fulfill the 1/3 requirement of all names on the list being female, 1/3, then they cannot contest an election. That, at that time, women in Parliament were 20%. From the time that was enacted, and for the first elections with the new amendment of 2006, the women's participation in Parliament grew without having a requirement that the political parties must now 1/3 select women in the members of Parliament. At this point now, 39% of the MPs are female. Over 12% of our MPs are Amerindian, indigenous people. And so in terms of, we're doing much better than many other countries. If you think of Canada, only recently, in recent elections with Trudeau, what was that, a year or two ago, that for the first time you had indigenous members of Parliament sitting in the federal, Ottawa. And the United States, the numbers are very, very small for indigenous people. I think they're probably, I don't know. I only know of one person coming from Hawaii, but I can't say. And so even with the American Congress, the Guyana Parliament is way ahead of the United States House of Representatives and Congress in terms of women's representation. And we are higher than most countries in this hemisphere. And so, in terms of the Constitution, the amendment we made allowed for political parties that if they wanted to contest, they had to have at least 1/3 on the list. Obviously, in this time going round, it may very well be that the women's groups will call for 50%. Who knows? But that's part of the process of a country developing and gaining. We have nothing in our parliament to say that there must be ethnic representation. It talks about gender. But in fact, indigenous people right now, they are 12% of the parliament, when in fact of the population, they're approximately a little over 10% of the population. So in terms of what are called vulnerable groups, in terms of the parliament, we are not doing badly.
All right. Thank you very much, Minister. Professor Narayana, are you
Yeah,
on?
can you hear?
Yes,
You can
go
hear?
ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Initially constructed under the Burnham regime,
Yeah.
the Constitution was bent towards political domination.
Yes.
What can you tell us that the current government has done so far to erode that tendency towards political domination, especially of a singular party?
Well, you asked about Constitution. So the Constitution in the 1999-2001 period was deliberate in removing what was called the Burnham clauses, Burnham's imperial powers, which were more than the American presidents. So it was very deliberate in that period to remove the clauses that gave Burnham greater powers as a president, as an executive president, than even the American president. So that's number one. So those clauses don't exist anymore. Secondly, as I explained just now, we built into the Constitution the role for the leading opposition with regards to a number of very critical appointments. And that still stays there. And it has worked in some cases and not worked in some cases based on the willingness of the leading opposition to play its part as the Constitution defines. And so the issue of the power of the president in comparison to other Caribbean countries, the prime ministers, because they don't have executive presidents, they have ceremonial presidents or what they call governor generals who play a ceremonial role in terms of appointing. But the prime ministers would be equivalent in terms of some executive power. But the prime ministers of the Caribbean region, English speaking, appoint constitutional bodies without consulting necessarily the leading opposition, without a parliamentary committee making nominations to the president for him to appoint. The Judicial Service Commission makes recommendations to the president that they want the following people as judges. The president has a right in the Constitution to question and can put in writing why he has a concern. The Judicial Service Commission will review it and tell him that he's wrong, and he has no recourse after that. He has to appoint the judge. And an example of that, what happened was when President Ramatar was president, and the Judicial Service Commission proposed a judge who was a former activist and head of the YSM, the Young Socialist Movement at that time, which got renamed Young Youth and Students Movement to remove the socialist taint from it. And the president then wrote his concerns that what they were appointing was a politician and he would be partisan. The Judicial Service reviewed the president's arguments and rejected them. And the president, Ramatar, had to appoint the gentleman as the justice, and he remains a justice in the system up to today. So one has to be careful that one doesn't talk generally without understanding our Constitution. There are many things I'm sure the president would like to do, but there are things he has to comply with the president, with the Constitution. He doesn't have certain powers. Not anymore. Not anymore. And so he has executive powers on a number of things. The executive has a right to make decisions. The executive is headed by the president. And so there are powers and authority that is exclusively government. For example, to bring the budget. That is exclusively the role of the executive of every single country in the world. The role of the president to appoint his cabinet. That is also something that is not unusual in any country. That is the authority of the head of government or the head of state. And so there's not a question of the Constitution being a problem. The accusations that the president may have executive authority, yes, he has executive authority. That's why you get elected, to have executive authority. You have the votes behind you. If you don't have the votes behind you, then you don't have executive authority. But there's a difference between executive authority and executive lawlessness. There's a difference between the two things. The executive lawlessness is what we saw during the Granger period, where even Christopher Ram, who is we know as a critic of the PEPC, admitted in several articles in the Starbuck News in that period that this was the worst. Guyana had the worst reputation in that period for executive lawlessness, with a number of cases in courts, both with the Chief Justice, with the High Court, with the Caribbean Court of Justice, that found the president violating the Constitution and making unlawful decisions. And so we have the highest number of cases against the president in the judiciary throughout to our apex court, the Caribbean Court of Justice, with regards to President Granger. And so one has to be careful not to one has to talk, what are we talking about in terms of political authority? Any government that has won the votes and is not a minority government has a mandate to execute, not only on behalf of their own supporters, but on behalf of the whole country. And I don't think that the President Ali's government has been found wanting in that no community can say in Guyana that the present government, whether they voted or didn't vote for it, has not benefited. Roads, schools, health centers, police stations, hampers when there are floods, COVID relief for every single household across Guyana, free vaccines, free medical attention, for example, pensions being increased, and going into interior areas where people never got pensions or public assistance because they didn't have their ID cards. And we've been able to constantly be improving that so that the elderly, particularly those in the interior, majority of them who didn't have ID cards, can get their ID cards and get access to public assistance and old age pension, which they were denied. Some got, but many didn't. And those numbers, and that's why the numbers for old age pension has gone up so high, as well as public assistance. So I think we have to look at, are we talking about executive lawlessness? Are we talking about executive authority? Which one are we talking about?
Mm-hmm. Okay, a follow-up, Professor.
Yeah, most constitutions have a system of internal checks and balances, and especially in the promotion of good governance. How would you describe the PPC approach to those balances to reflect good governance within the country?
Well, I'll say this, you'll only see any form of good governance when the PPC is in government. And we now have, those of who are too young to know what pre-92 was like, they've now had the 5 years of 2015 to 2020 to compare. The governance structures, the architecture of our state is defined by the Constitution. That's the architecture. State has an architecture. What is the architecture of Guyana? It is talking about the layers of to give people their right in terms of the courts, in terms of appointments, and so on. The governance structures of Guyana are built on the Constitution. So when one has a public service commission that hiring people, what is the governance structure? What is the policies? And recently the Public Service Commission just created a new website, a digitalized form of application and promotion for the public servants. The Teachers Service Commission has a similar digitalized application process to try to ensure there's transparency and accountability, to not be subjected to the whims and fancies of individuals. And so there is when you look at the NPTAB, the National Procurement and Tender Administration, the issue of the Procurement Act in 2004, we were the first country in the English-speaking community that had a Procurement Act that made it very clear, and the ministers are not involved in this, that you have structures and defined codes of conduct, the issues of the procedures to do with procurement, and the Public Accounts Committee functioning and being able by the standing orders to have powers to review the Auditor General's report. There are structures, but we are humans, and therefore sometimes humans make mistakes. Humans don't maybe work as hard as they should be, who knows? But the structures are there and they're solid. What has been invested over the years of trying to improve the skills that are in those structures, training and modernizing the structures, so that the whole push for digitalization and information and communication technology into the public sector, the state sector, to improve efficiency and to have a more transparent process. We passed the Planning and Single Window Development Act, which will reduce 12 procedures, 12 applications that one has to go through, 12 stages to get a land permit, to get certain permits for housing and certain developmental investment, projects. These are all now going to be put into one single window, which can be tracked, which will have timelines according to the bill and the act, so that people can apply for their house lot, or they're applying for land for agriculture, that the process, it brings 12 agencies, which if you're applying, you have to go to 12 different agencies to clear an application for something, whether it's an investment or whether it's a small business or whether it is a house lot. And so those are areas where technology is helping us to expedite and to create a fairer and more transparent system. You have the Data Protection Act, which is dealing with protecting people's data, their personal information. You have all these layers of new laws that we brought in that are going to use technology in a creative and a way to make sure we're more efficient. But the Constitution is not the one that's holding us back. It is how we as humans, and I mean we in the general sense, how we pay attention, how we work, how do we modernize. And of course, we have to recognize that until we had discovered oil, we were still a poor developing country. Oil has given us the opportunity to expend money that we never had. We never had before. We could never get it from loans either. I remember the days of post-96 elections, 97 elections. We were a heavily indebted country. I remember as a Minister of Health trying to take a collapsed health sector in 92 to 97 with a budget which my colleagues now would laugh at. I had budgets of a couple $100 million. Now it is several $1 billion for health and education. We didn't have the money. You had the IMF coming in every quarter to check on us, telling us we had to fire public servants because it was too heavily, the bureaucracy was too heavy. But at the same time, you had a study showing that 61% of your population was below the poverty line. So in 97, we bit the dust and we took on the HIPC, which was the support for countries that were heavily indebted. So HIPC meant heavily indebted countries, called HIPC. And it was grueling. It was grueling to pass those conditions to get us to a point where we could get concessional loans from the IMF and World Bank and IDB for many of our programs. When we started the housing program under Chetty Jagan, and Chetty went to the World Bank and the IDB and asked for funding for a national housing program for the poor and vulnerable of this country and the low-income people, he was told plain, point blank, unless you sell that land at market price, we will not give you a loan. And so we had to start all over again without any money and how to do it. And there was a startup slow. We couldn't do it quickly as we liked. And so the issue of reality and theory are not necessarily the same thing. We've had our experiences. We've gone through them, but now this is a period where we have some fiscal space based on oil to go at a rapid pace before oil runs out, because oil will run out. That's what Trinidad experience they're having. And so we have to use that to the best of our ability to transform our nation, while at the same time diversifying the economy. So we're not a monoculture, which is what Granger was doing. Granger was going to make us into a monoculture dependent on oil. No money for agriculture, no money for other interventions, close down call centers, don't encourage the expansion of the hospitality sector. There was no plan. All it was taxation and oil. And so we're on a different track completely. And so the constitutional discussions are going to be interesting because Guyanese are always innovative. We're unique in the Caribbean region. We have come up with solutions and programs that many other countries don't have. And we faultingly, we start and we find sometimes it's difficult to implement, but the fact that we have created these things shows that we have a level of special quality of our people. The Low Carbon Development Strategy of 2009-2010 went through the entire country consulting, in particular the indigenous people, before it even went to Parliament and was adopted in Parliament. The first country in the world to have something like that. And then we come back with the Low Carbon Development Strategy 2030. Again, it went through a consultative process with all the indigenous population, private sector, labor, and other people, other organizations in civil society. And it is still special, unique, and the only country that's doing this at this level and making the LCDS our national development strategy. So our national development strategy will be based on a carbon resilient and diversified economy in which we're going to ensure and work towards and ensure that no one is left behind. It's not going to be happen overnight. It can't happen overnight.
All right. Thank you, Minister. I just want to divert a bit. I know there has been calls by the several people from the opposition. They have a neurotic preoccupation apparently over the introduction of biometrics. Now, you have mentioned that in 1997, the PP won the election and you said it was declared free and fair. But then you recall the Esther Pereira case where the PNC had agreed with the PPP that they should do voter identification. They went into that election, voter ID was used. After the PNC lost, they now challenged that very decision that they agreed to in court, and they won. And you mentioned that they shortened the life of the PP government by probably a year and a half.
Yeah.
Now, my concern is this. Let's say, hypothetically, the PP agree to biometric with the PNC. Don't you see they can raise it up again as another constitutional issue? And knowing the pattern of behavior? Go ahead.
Well, I mean, it's the GCOM has to make that decision, and as far as I know, GCOM has not made that decision. It is an issue that has been discussed for quite a while, both by the PPP has had different discussions and brought in different I think the Canadians at one time was advocating this, and so on. But then we had the experience of the United States. Remember with what was called the impregnated ballots? What was the year was that? With I forgot which
2000.
president. Huh?
2000.
Yes. And so, I mean, the most important thing in our country is that the people are registered to vote, they have their ID cards, but they're allowed to vote with their passports, etc. And that no matter what the PNC does, they cannot show that the system is flawed. What was flawed in the 2020 elections was the senior officers with the then governments conspiring to take away the votes of the people, and their choice for would be their government after the vote was counted. You know, when Chetty was alive and the what was called the eminent leaders of the Prime Minister of Belize and President Carter, former President Carter, came here, and we agreed with Hoyt to give him another year to allow for reforms of the electoral system, and that was 1990. And that was because we were fighting for the counting of the votes of the placer pool. And we had to give him another year to extend the Constitution again in 91 to allow for that to come in. And the law finally came in. As long as we have the count at the place a poll and there's no interference of it, and that the registration list is checked and scrutinized and observed by all the party scrutineers, as has been happening from the time we introduced all these new amendments to the election laws of Guyana, that biometrics is not necessarily urgent, because in the polling station, I'll use me as an example. I'm a registered voter. When I go to vote, I show my ID card, or I say I've lost it just 2 days ago before the election. The staff looks at a folio, what's called a folio, and the scrutineers have a copy of it too in the polling station, that shows my photograph, it shows my date of birth, where I live, my name, and my fingerprints. So the scrutineer can look at it and says, you don't look like Gail Teixeira. And then the photograph is there. So that every person coming through, their photograph is in the folio for every voter on that list. So anybody coming in and trying to pretend there's somebody else, it was rather difficult to do. And so we believe that the electoral laws, and particularly those we've recently amended in 2022, to remove the interference by the likes of Lowenfield and Myers and others, that we have created some firewalls to protect us from going through a similar situation. But the fact is that every count of poll would be uploaded shortly after it goes to the regional place and then uploaded onto websites. So people don't have to wait for GCOM to announce that this is the result. These results will be sent through and uploaded on GCOM's site. So the biometric debate, it is not that at some point Guyana may go in that direction or the GCOM may want to go in that direction. But right now, biometrics is not the issue that is holding back a free and fair election in Guyana. What nearly put us over the precipice is humans such as Lowenfield and Myers and others in the bureaucracy at the very senior level of GCOM, which is the body constitutionally given to protect and manage the elections of Guyana, conspired and worked with the former government members to thwart the will of the Guyanese people. And they succeeded for 5 months in holding up the declaration, which everybody knew what the declaration was by that time. And even after a recount, they delayed again almost 2 months to prevent that from coming out. So the electoral laws didn't create this, nor did the Constitution. These were humans and senior persons with politicians flaunting, absolutely flaunting the Constitution and the laws of our country. Had nothing to do with biometrics. But the opposition needs to hold on to biometrics because of their argument, which they've taken to court, and a number of their election petitions have been dismissed. They're left with one that they're trying not to come into court, where the evidence would come in to show what they did. So they're holding on to biometrics because it helps them with their argument that, you see, the elections are fraud. 200,000 people voted who are overseas, and these are all fraudulent votes. They cannot prove it. There's no proof of it. It is all hogwash, but that is what they're holding on to, someone who's like fallen overboard in a sea and barely holding on to a piece of straw to stay alive. Biometrics is not the issue that's holding back has ever held back free and fair elections in Ghana. But at some point, technology and everything may be fine. But we have to remember too that not all of Ghana is connected. We have made strides in that, but not all of Ghana is connected. And after biometric, you have to have connection. You have to have the country connected fully. Every single little settlement has to be connected. And we've made big strides, but we have not achieved the entire country.
Thank you very much, Minister. Of course, there are many more issues we need to untangle. The important thing you have mentioned all along about the issue of compliance, which is a human factor. We can have the strongest laws or constitutional provisions. If you have miscreants, they will always hoard the system. Dr. Ganga, your last comment, and then to Professor Narin, your last comment, because we run out of time. Go ahead.
Yes, of course. Good governance would require good primary information. What are your ideas on investments in the production and dissemination of information at our ministries, including the Stats Bureau?
Well, access to information is always important. I don't know about investments, but I know that I sit in Parliament, I sit in Cabinet, and we've gone out to tender to upgrade a number of the data systems, GRA, the Audit Office, the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Human Services. They're all data is there. Not all data may be easily available at the click of, to the public. But the issue of data and statistics is a critical component of decision making in government and of measuring how well have we done. And so, particularly as you asked in the very beginning about women and indigenous people. And so we can now, which we couldn't have done years ago, say how many youth have benefited from the shade houses, from agricultural investments. We can say how many women have benefited from agricultural investments. We can say how many women are property owners in Guyana. In fact, we have one of the highest levels of women owning property in Guyana than the rest of Latin America. And that's partly because of the housing programs. And so there is data there. We have to become sometimes more sophisticated or in the data we want, and to be able to, use it to create more information that we pull out that could be used for government and not necessarily for the public, or vice versa. So there is a definite recognition of information systems, ICT as a critical component of government, and all the agencies I know of are all making efforts to do that. And as I said just a little while ago, the Public Service Commission has a whole website and digitalized the application process for jobs in the public service and for promotion, with stages of how it's done, and with firewalls, and with the applicants knowing what stage they're at, just like in the single window development bill I spoke of earlier as well. People know what stage their application is at and if it's being held up, etc. So that we are very cognizant of that. And we have a young cabinet and a young president who is very aware of how data and data information systems can help government to function. So I can't answer about the investment part, but I know that there have been a number of investors, and in fact, we've gone to what you call public tender for upgrading of a variety of information and communication technology systems in the government.
Professor Narayan?
Yeah, I just
Professor Narayan.
have a comment. Yes, you can hear me?
Yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Minister, you touched on a crucial issue in terms of Guyana's development. In other words, the coming of age of Guyana from its rudimentary state to today, and I'm glad to hear some of the things that you enunciated, that the reforms that are taking place constitutionally and revisionally is to create the intersection within the major institutional structures within the country. And I know this will take time, and you have alluded to that fact that it is time and it will be prolonged in some cases, but it is good towards building a democratic society. And I'm glad to hear that you're working towards that goal. And whatever comments you may have towards that is appreciated.
Thank you very much, Professor. Honorable Minister, we are very pleased to have you. As usual, you're very knowledgeable, experienced, and articulate. And I pass you over. I don't know if our host has any questions for you, Shamisa?
Yes, we do. Thank you very much, Dr. Tara. We have a question that's coming from Rajendra Singh. We have noticed a degree of lawlessness across the country. The minister spoke about executive lawlessness. Given some controversial court decisions recently and delays in bringing alleged rigors of the 2020 elections, does the minister detect some degree of judicial lawlessness in Guyana?
Look, we have all been concerned from time to time with judicial decisions. And I'm sure you living in the States, you have the same when you see some of the decisions in regards to Trump or other persons of high authority. One hopes that in the long run that justice will prevail. And I'll give you an example of when I said we were yo-yo in the 2020, you had the time when Justice Roxanne George ruled that, 33 was the majority of 65, and where the opposition went to the courts, including Nigel Hughes and others, to say no, the majority was 34. We went to the Court of Appeal and they said no, 34 is the majority. We went to the Caribbean Court of Justice and they said no, 33 is the majority. So one has to have confidence that the system of justice works. It may not work at one level, but it will work at other levels. And so our own experience in 2020 was that the Caribbean Court of Justice upheld the Constitution of Guyana. And I'm sure many of these cases will end up at the Caribbean Court of Justice as our apex court. And I'm glad that we in the PUP had agreed to join the Caribbean Court of Justice, which, as you know, many of the CARICOM countries have not. They've stayed with the Privy Council. And so Guyana, Barbados, I think, and Belize are the three members, although it's located in Trinidad. Trinidad's not a member of the CCJ. That the CCJ has upheld the constitution of the various countries, and including Guyana. So what it have to look at the whole continuum of the justice system and not just a localized case or a localized level of the judiciary.
Thank you. Our other question is from Mike Bika. He says, can you please comment on the current GTU industrial actions and demands, and also on the effort of the PNC controlled mayor and city council to block the Qatari investment of 300 million US dollars?
Well, in the very beginning of this program, I was asked a question about the teachers' strike. So I answered that already. And time is a factor, so I don't want to repeat that. But you're right. The city council would rather go and fight and lose the fight rather than have a huge investment coming to Guyana, which would benefit everyone, including Georgetown people. There being the fact that the chief engineer has said very clearly today that he has researched all the documents in the papers and that land does not belong to the city council. And all the evidence seems to show that the 43 acres in 1860s, which was given for the city, all the land goes up to, coming from south, comes up to what we call Long Road, Thomas Road, the canal there, where Queen's College is, and stretching to what would be around what is now Vicinjan Road, but it's on that side of the canal, for those of you who know Georgetown, and not on the other side, which is National Park. So when that land was given in the 1860s, it was then divided for Queen's College, for GTI, GITC, different sports grounds, during trade union grounds, cultural labor, etc., etc. So, but the lands north of that canal on Thomas Road was never given to the city council. It was always state land. And so they don't have a pin to hold on. And if they want to go to court, they're going to waste their money. But you're correct. They do want to delay it. And the chief engineer is basically saying, well, I'm not going to issue a cease order for something that I know I can't defend. The land does not belong to City Hall, to Georgetown and the city council. So I think that, it's like how do you say, shadow boxing, just to try to see if they can delay. But I don't think it's going to work at all. I don't think it's going to work.
Thank you very much. It's truly refreshing to listen to you this evening. And thank you for everything that you have done for us as a woman. It's a proud moment to hear that, we have a huge percent of women in Parliament. And I hope women like you who have paved the way can continue this journey. Thank you very much to our entire panel. Thank you for your questions, Dr. Tower. Thank you to all of our viewers. Thank you so much for your interaction and for your feedback tonight. To everyone out there, good evening. This is the Guyana Dialogue, and I'm your host, Shamiza Ali. Good evening.
Thank you very
everyone.
much, Minister.
Good night,
Thank you very
everyone.
much. It's a pleasure to
Good
have you.
night, everyone.
Our
Thank
panelists,
you.
thank you all. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night,